of our book, by the way, I will use the term not because I have a tapeworm or because I'm royalty, because I have a co-author of this book, a co-author who's a genuine astronomer. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination an astronomer. I like to fancy myself a historian of ideas. Ideengeschichtler is a term I learned in German. So he and I have combined our efforts. So he's an associate astronomer of the Specola Vaticana, the Vatican Observatory. And oh, good. And what you see on the cover of the book is the famous Copernican circles of the orbits. We now call them orbits. He wouldn't have called them orbits. The spheres of the planets with Earth in its familiar position. We photoshopped in the NASA blue marble onto this diagram to kind of capture from Copernicus to NASA. And by the way, we've got the bottom left-hand corner is blue because until, well, it was a very gradual process. People thought that the universe was blue, not black. And so that was a big transition that we explore in the book, and I won't say anything more about tonight. So I want to direct our gaze back to the great Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus, whose new vision of the universe 5 centuries ago changed forever how we look at the universe. Not only scientifically, but also our understanding of, in one sense, our place in the universe. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, there are the circles again, and then the next slide. Good. This is a very familiar picture that has come to be known as the blue marble. And it was taken by one of the Apollo astronauts in 1972. And among Chris's and my favorite descriptions of the distant blue Earth are those of Apollo astronauts themselves. For example, Gene Cernan wrote, "You're looking across the blackness of space 250,000 miles away, looking at the most beautiful star in the heavens. And it's moving in a blackness that's almost beyond conception." His fellow astronaut, Michael Collins, described Earth as shining like a jewel in a black sky. And as you know, just 2 months ago, NASA, with Artemis 2, returned to orbit the moon after half a century or so, and of course took further photos of planet Earth from a lunar perspective. Next slide, please. A little sharper than the previous one. And the next slide, please. And there's, I love this one. You can go on the NASA website and see innumerable ones. But there's the moon. Oh, and there's Earth off in the distance, shining like a jewel in the dark sky. And one more slide, please. Okay, yeah. So there we are. To Photoshop planet Earth onto these circles, we had to obscure the role of the moon, but it's there, believe me. Part of the subtitle of our book, as already mentioned, is From Copernicus to NASA. And I don't want to forget that the now familiar phrase, planet Earth, is one that we owe to Copernicus. That makes it a relatively recent concept in the great sweep of human history. 500 years is only a fraction of the thousands of years of recorded history. Even for a long time after Copernicus, the concept of Earth as a wandering star, which is what planet means from planes, Greek, for wanderer, seemed to most people strange and contradictory. Does it feel to you as if the Earth is moving at about in its rotation, about 1,000 kilometers an hour. I don't feel it. And then it's moving in that other way around the sun annually. How many of us still consult our weather apps to find out when the sun will rise tomorrow? Well, I've got news for you. The sun's not going to rise tomorrow. The earth is turning, so it looks as if the sun is rising. So there are and were lots of good common sense reasons for skepticism about Copernicus. So in our book, Chris and I declare that Copernicus made our home planet a star. And of course he didn't. It was a planet all along, but we're talking about how we imagine things. How do we think about stars? Even the colloquial use of star to describe someone who's outstanding in his or her field, sports star, movie star, rising star in any given profession, soccer star, suggests that we place a superlative evaluation on someone or something we call a star. Astronomically, of course, today we normally use the word star to denote a self-luminous celestial body. But from this ancient times to the early modern period, what we call stars were referred to as fixed stars. This distinguished them in all their regularity and predictability from the wandering stars or planets, those other bright lights that moved against the heavenly background of the fixed stars, and still do. Now, we know that planets are not self-luminous, so it would be tempting for us moderns to treat these wandering stars either not as stars at all, or else stars of kind of second-class rank, pretenders to stardom, as it were. Ancient and other observers, right up to early modern times, faced no such temptation. Then as now, when it comes to sheer brightness in our sky, as you astronomers know, Jupiter and Venus easily outshine Sirius, the brightest of the fixed stars. Mars can too, sometimes. So to the naked eye, at least, there's no obvious reason for considering the wandering stars to be lesser or dimmer objects than the fixed ones. Excuse me. This claim is emphatically true for two other heavenly bodies we now seldom think of as planets. The sun, which is self-luminous, and the moon, both of which, like the other planets, appear to move about in the sky against the background of the fixed stars of the zodiac. These classically make up the 7 planets, and each still is honored by our various names for days of the week. Can I have the next slide, please? So, Sunday is the Sunday, and Monday is Moon Day. We mess around in English with different names. Martes in Spanish, Mars, Mercredi, Wednesday, Jovedi or Jeudi, Jove, Jupiter, Vendredi, Venerdi, Venus, and then, of course, the last day of the week, Saturn's Day, Saturday. Not only honored, these 7 planets were also often across ages and cultures objects of veneration, even of worship. They were considered literally heavenly beings, divine. The following anecdote illustrates how even in the 21st century, planetary status has seemed something special. In 2005, astronomer Mike Brown of Caltech in California discovered the body now called Eris, orbiting beyond Pluto. Eris was one of a number of distant bodies out past Neptune that astronomers had been discovering then and are still discovering, but Eris rivaled Pluto in size. Should it therefore be recognized as the 10th planet? No. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, meeting in Prague, voted to reclassify Pluto as a dwarf planet. Some of you will remember the fuss that followed this. Eris went into this class as well. The result of the IAU's decision was that a huge public relations controversy broke out in the media. Hey, I was taught that Pluto was the 9th planet. Were my elementary textbooks wrong? And so on. And in some state legislatures, there was a fuss made of this as well. And also among admirers of an astronomer named Clyde Tombaugh, who had discovered Pluto in 1930. Pluto's reclassification was widely viewed as a slight or demotion. The American Dialect Society, the next slide, please, subsequently named Plutode its word of the year for 2006. To Pluto is to demote or devalue something or someone or something, as happened to the former planet Pluto. All this reaction concerned mere technical vocabulary concerning a celestial object that no naked human eye had ever observed, and that was discovered only 76 years before its demotion by the IAU. So this is what I'm coming to with Copernicus. How much more of a shock must have resulted then, Chris and I argue, when Copernicus demoted the sun of all the visible objects in the universe, the one that for millennia and across countless cultures had been an object of highest honor, in some cases even of religious worship. But remember that one of Copernicus's key maneuvers was to reverse the locations of Earth and Sun in his schematic diagram. Before Copernicus, Earth appears in the center, and now the Sun is in the center, and there's the punchline. In Copernicus, the Sun has now been Plutoed, demoted. When we understand the locational value system of the two-story pre-Copernican universe, we grasp what a huge insult to the Sun this might have involved. We grasp just how flagrantly the Sun was being Plutoed. Only a year after the appearance of De Revolutionibus, Copernicus's great treatise, in 1543, a scholar named Giovanni Tolosani complained that Copernicus, quote, puts the indestructible Sun in a place subject to destruction. And exactly this objection to his cosmology may have been Copernicus's motivation for rhetorically, as I like to say, renovating the cosmic basement. If some of you like me have renovated a basement, so I like the image. Copernicus getting out his rhetorical tools and renovating the cosmic basement. Construing the center in the most highly poetic passages of his work as a perfectly fitting residence for the Sun. I have the next slide, please. Behold, in the midst of all resides the Sun, Sol in Latin. For who in this beautiful temple would set his lamp in another or a better place, whence to illuminate all things at once? Truly indeed does the Sun, as if seated upon a royal throne, Solium, govern his family of stars as they circle about him. The very vocabulary of Copernicus's original Latin seems to endorse the fittingness of this arrangement. Of course, the center is the right place to locate the throne, solium, from which the sun, Sol, most conveniently governs his stellar family. Now, if the idea that Copernicus raised the Earth to stardom rather than demoted Earth from its supposedly privileged position at the cosmic center, if this idea seems counter to what you have heard about Copernicus, that might be because Copernicus succeeded in convincing both future astronomers and a wider public that the center was indeed a special place, one befitting a throne. So much so that from about a century after publication of his work, writers began suggesting that it was Earth that had been dethroned from its formerly special place in the center. Chris Graney and I call this demotion misinterpretation the great Copernican cliche. In our book, we critique this view not only because it is a misinterpretation, but also because it has become such a standard, almost orthodox take on Copernicus that it routinely gets treated simply as a fact of science history. Almost anyone writing on the history of science as it relates to human value seems compelled to declare that Copernicus dethroned or demoted humankind, us, by removing Earth from the center of the universe. For example, in 1973, in one of a series of public lectures marking the 500th anniversary of Copernicus's birth, Theodosius Dobzhansky declared that with Copernicus, next slide please, Earth was dethroned from its presumed centrality and preeminence. And the same general claim continues to be repeated year by year, whether in popular accounts or in the writings of the most learned scientists. England's astronomer royal, Sir Martin Rees, asserts it is over 400 years since Copernicus dethroned the Earth from the privileged position that Ptolemy's cosmology accorded it. In contrast, we argue that it was a promotion, and indeed beyond that, that it helped humankind imagine that the whole universe might be full of other Earths with other humankinds on them. We'll see if that jibes with Spielberg's interpretation in his new movie. No one thinks of other Earths as dethroned, Plutoed places, because Plutoed places are not where one boldly goes, seeking new life and new civilizations. We call the terrestrial demotion interpretation of Copernicus a cliche to highlight the sheer pervasiveness in accounts of the history of astronomy. Meme-like, it has been repeated so often and by such respectable voices that it now seems virtually a part of everyone's mental conceptual furniture. Such is the nature of a cliche. The very frequency of repetition results, independent of its truth or falsehood, in its being repeated yet again. Perhaps not every cliche is false, but we think that this one is. Before concluding, I'd like to introduce you to two of my favorite English writers who were deeply impressed by the work of Copernicus, one from the 16th century and one from the 17th century. But first, I must mention my beloved Georg Joachim Rheticus, whom I, in an earlier book, called the first Copernican, because he was the one and only student of Copernicus, who visited Copernicus on the Baltic coast in 1539, and in the year 1540 published a sort of trial balloon summarizing Copernicus's cosmology, hoping to convince his teacher that there was an audience for his ideas. This Rheticus, young mathematician from Wittenberg, then sent copies of the little book titled simply Narratio Prima, first account, to influential people across Central and Northern Europe. One of them, Rheticus's former teacher in Lindau in southwest Germany, in turn forwarded his copy to a friend living on the other side of Lake Constance. And this teacher, former teacher, included an introductory letter offering a vivid glimpse of how wonderful and how difficult to believe the new cosmology would inevitably appear to its early readership. Next slide, please. The letter begins, "Behold, most distinguished sir, I am sending you this little book. Not only is it something new and unknown to our contemporaries, but also, if I am not mistaken, it will surprise and utterly astonish you, even to the verge of disbelief." This letter and the whole text of the first account were in 1566 republished as an appendix to the second edition of De Revolutionibus, Copernicus's treatise. One copy of this volume then found its way to England into the hands of another brilliant mathematician whose name was Thomas Digges, contemporary of Queen Elizabeth. On the volume's title page, Digges boldly wrote, "Vulgi opinio error." The common opinion is wrong, and went on to become the foremost English Copernican of his century. In 1576, at the age of only 30, he published the first ever translation of Copernicus from Latin into a vernacular language. Yes, that vernacular language was English. I was bragging to my Polish colleagues about this a few weeks ago in northern Poland. In those days, English was just, a peripheral coastal language off the coast of Europe. But as a native English speaker, I'm kind of proud that it was English into which Copernicus was first translated. And this was 20 years before Johannes Kepler went public in his support for Copernicanism. I'm going to read you a fairly lengthy section from Thomas Digges. I think it's a beautiful piece of writing. In his glowing introduction of Copernicus's astonishing, it's really hard for us to realize how astonishing that new teaching was about the movement of the Earth in two different ways and the relocation into the realm of the planets. Digges holds nothing back. The next slide, please. But in this our age, one rare wit, both by long study, painful practice, and rare invention, delivered a new theory or model of the world, showing that the earth resteth not in the center of the whole world, but only in the center of this our mortal world or globe of elements. He's still using Aristotelian language. The four elements being what? Earth, water, air, fire. Which, environed and enclosed in the moon's orb, is carried yearly round about the sun, which like a king in the midst of all reigneth and giveth laws of motion to the rest, spherically dispersing his glorious beams of light through all this celestial temple, and the earth itself to be one of the planets, having its peculiar and strange courses, turning every 24 hours round upon his own center, whereby the sun and great globe of fixed stars seem to sway about and turn, albeit, indeed, they remain fixed. Next slide, please. But reason and deep discourse of which in those days meant wisdom, knowledge, opened these things to Copernicus. I thought it convenient to publish this to the end such noble English minds might not be altogether defrauded of so noble a part of philosophy. We would say science. And to the end, it might manifestly appear that Copernicus meant not, as some have fondly excused him, to deliver these grounds of Earth's mobility only as mathematical principles, feigned, and not as philosophical, truly averred. I think it's a stunning piece of writing. Digges flatters his noble English audience, permits them to keep thinking of Earth as located in the center of the sublunary sphere, of that our mortal globe of elements. Indeed, elsewhere, Digges speaks of how in the midst of the globe of mortality hangeth this dark star or ball of earth and water. At the same time, he gives us an arresting taste of Copernican vertigo, with Earth following peculiar and strange courses, while the stars seem to sway about and turn, albeit they remain fixed. Excuse me. On the one hand, Digges makes huge concessions to traditional Aristotelian cosmology, elements and all, while on the other hand, stating plainly that Copernicus' system is no fiction. Digges knows that many, and again in those days fondly meant foolishly, have regarded Copernicus as a producer of excellent mathematics while treating his cosmology as a mere hypothesis. Could I please have just a drop of water? It was offered to me earlier, and I said, no, I don't need it, but now I think I do. But no, that's just not right. Copernicus' system, as Digges puts it, is philosophical, truly averred, which is a kind of pleonasm or redundancy that means truly, truly true. Thank you, Danny. Thanks. You're welcome. In effect, Digges says this is how the universe actually works. Copernicus was right. Perhaps we can forgive Digges for clinging to some medieval vocabulary that Copernicus science would render obsolete. In particular, his repeated reference to Earth as a dark star. We've already tonight seen photographic evidence that Earth is not a dark star. Not until the next century would Galileo, having constructed and deployed his telescope, explain how Earth is not a dark star, but rather one that, like the moon, reflects the sun's light, and so is brightly visible from what we now call space. Next slide, please. On the basis of his description of Earthshine, Galileo decisively denies that Earth should any longer be, as he puts it, excluded from the dance of the stars. For the Earth does have motion. Earth does have motion. It surpasses the moon in brightness, and it is not the sump where the universe's filth and ephemera collect. That was the old view. One of his predecessors, Giovanni Pico del Mirandola, an Italian philosopher, said that we live here in the filthy and excrementary parts of the lower world. And Galileo, based on Copernican science, is rejecting that view of Earth. That's why We do not consider Copernicus to have demoted, but rather to have promoted Earth, cosmologically speaking. No demotion of Earth. Finally, as soon as we could at least imagine an Earth visible from space, and perhaps speculate about travel among the wandering stars, we could ask how Earth might appear to an extraterrestrial visitor. Such was the thought experiment conducted by the English poet Thomas Traherne in the 1670s. Traherne offers the scenario of a celestial stranger discovering our noble planet for the first time. Traherne, in the now established tradition of Copernicus, imagines Earth as a star within the universe. Certainly not the universe's sump, but also not just another world. And this is, I'll begin the quotation, and then the next slide will be the second half of it, just to hold off on that. Had a man always been in one of the stars, or confined to the body of the flaming sun, or surrounded with nothing but pure ether, at vast and prodigious distances from the earth, acquainted with nothing but the azure sky, the blue universe, and face of heaven, little could he dream of any treasures hidden in that azure veil afar off. Should he be let down on a sudden and see the sea, maybe on the Sunshine Coast, and the effects of those influences he never dreamed of, such strange kind of creatures, such mysteries and varieties, such never heard of colors, such a new and lively green in the meadows, such odoriferous and fragrant flowers, such reviving and refreshing winds. It would make him cry out, "How blessed are thy holy people, how divine, how highly exalted. Heaven itself is under their feet. The earth seems to swell with pride that it bears them all. All its treasures laugh and sing to serve them." Next slide, please. Verily, this star is a nest of angels. This little star, so wide and so full of mysteries, so capacious and so full of territories, containing innumerable repositories of delight when we draw near. Who would have expected, who could have hoped for such enjoyments? It's a powerful question that resonates still in 2026. The starring of our precious planet, this nest of angels, is emphatically part of the shining legacy of Copernicus. So let me conclude with some side-by-side images of, again, our bright blue marble surrounded by black. Next slide, please. Next one. There we are. They're the same picture, just with different cropping. Depending on how the photographs are cropped, the marble takes up most of the foreground or only a tiny portion of it, the pale blue dot. Either way, most of what we know applies to this blue marble. Astronomers have indeed explored some of the mysteries of the darkness beyond, but inevitably it remains for most of us, by comparison with Earth, boundless and ultimately impenetrable. The dark and the bright in the picture are counterparts to the two main themes of Graney's and my book. We understand how easy it would be to respond as if the immense and impenetrable dark, along perhaps with its eerie silence, if it were the dominant aspects of our Earth's story within the universe. But they are emphatically not, even if the dark does usefully serve to set off the bright. No, Chris Graney and I are not Team Darkness, nor Team Silence either. Instead, we see ourselves as humble, devoted members of Team Earth, lovers of this planet's inhabitants, and not just the human ones. In our book, we tried to show how the starring of the Earth, since Copernicus, offers true scientific insight into something real, something absolutely fascinating, something worth treasuring. You might be discouraged or displeased to be told that for all practical purposes, physically and astronomically speaking, Earth and Earth dwellers appear to be alone in the universe. And yet it's true. And we appreciate that that's not a fun fact, especially if you're Star Wars or Star Trek fans. And even if there's no science already, okay, no science yet to show that it's not a fact. But let's consider the claims that science does support. And I'll just sketch these. Earth is a planet, a wandering star, one that appears utterly unique and life-sustaining within our solar system and possibly within our galactic neighborhood. Earth, again, maybe uniquely contains complex, intelligent life, which includes the human beings here tonight on the Sunshine Coast. The friends sitting next to you tonight, and everyone you've ever known. Science also increasingly recognizes that unless the universe were, this is the knife edge contingency again, unless the universe were as vast and ancient as it is, roughly 14 billion years, we couldn't be here. Nor could we be communicating with each other as we are now doing. The minimum takeaway here is this: it's pointless to disparage ourselves and our species and our planet for being cosmically minuscule in size when our very existence is cosmologically predicated on the staggering disproportions between our smallness and the inconceivable largeness of the universe. Chris and I propose instead that the message of this image, captured from outer space, bright blue marble against a pitch black background, is not debilitating or discouraging. Rather, the true picture of Earth that emerges from this photograph, as well as from the wider history we've tried to unfold in our book, is exhilarating, humbling, even overwhelming. We decisively are participants in something genuinely special. We do inhabit this picture and this history, and we matter. To ponder this message, I suggest, is to taste, if fleetingly, what is meant by the word miraculous. Like beholding the face of a newborn child and realizing the knife-edge contingency and glory of a creature unique in the history of the universe, sensing also the burden and privilege of caring for it. We see our stories as reflecting, albeit imperfectly, the ineffable glory of Earth, our home, our planet. In the words of David Attenborough, it might seem like an obvious thing to say, but we need to keep saying it. Our planet is precious. And to echo Thomas Traherne and words written 3.5 centuries ago, this little star, so full of mysteries, may well render us awestruck, delighted, and grateful. I'm grateful to you for listening tonight. Thank you.